In 5, 4, 3.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Yes Phonics channel. I'm your host, Cheyenne Adamson, and this is where teachers, tutors, homeschoolers, parents, and educators everywhere come for valuable teaching information and insights. So today's video is going to be about how to deal with defiant teenagers. And I'm sure there's some parents out there who know exactly what phenomena this is all about. Maybe you've tried some different methods, maybe you've tried some disciplinary techniques and they haven't worked, or maybe they have, but just not to the degree that you wanted them to. Hopefully we'll be able to give you a few tips and tricks here today that will kind of maybe at least add to your repertoire, if not, maybe help you out a lot. And as always, you guys, I like to come at these videos not from a lecturing standpoint, like, hey, here's what you need to do, but more of like, hey, here's how we can help you out. We're here to help homeschoolers, teachers, and tutors, parents everywhere. This is what we're all about. So hopefully these are going to be some helpful things that you can implement in your everyday lifestyle and your parenting that will help you out a bunch. Whether you're a homeschooling parent or a teacher in a conventional school, you've probably dealt with a lack of enthusiasm from time to time. That's the understatement of the year. Oh, I remember some of my friends and I back in middle school, we'd just be, I don't say this with a whole lot of pride, but I was a bit of a class clown in middle school, going up to high school, especially in like PE and stuff. I like to make people laugh. And looking back on it, I probably could have been a bit more respectful than I should have been. So yeah, like there's definitely some kids out there who are clowning some teachers, absolutely. Pretty much nobody always wants to do their homework, especially young kids. And obviously that goes for kids of all ages as well, especially if they're teenagers though. Teenage intractability is just a feature of the teaching landscape, and there's not a lot that you can do to prevent it. But what if it's a chronic problem? And what do you do with a teenager who just never wants to do the work? What if your teenager is oppositional and angry, and not just sometimes, but all the time? At that point, the problem has transcended from the normal, manageable frame of teenagerdom and taken on a life of its own. Teenagers can become defiant for all sorts of reasons. Obviously, a classic is that they're chafing at parental involvement in their lives. Teens are trying to assert their independence and form an identity for themselves that's not defined by their parents. On the other hand, a post by hip homeschool moms, which I'll link below in the description, reports that the opposite problem, a teenage son who didn't feel like his mother was involved enough in his life. And just as often, teenage defiance has nothing to do with family at all. It's a reflection of something to do that's going on in a group of friends, or it has to do with politics or religion. And this does kind of harken back to our last video that we did, Brandon, about how when teenagers, as kids in general, are trying to find a little bit of independence, and parents are maybe kind of stepping on their toes a little bit too much. So if you're a parent and you can maybe self-diagnose a little bit or try to be objective a little bit at looking at your involvement in your kid's life, and you can kind of see yourself being that good old helicopter parent, maybe now is a great time you could just take a step back and maybe just cut down on that a little bit and see if that doesn't really help with the defiance. I think it would be. And if you can be objective and look at your parenting style and go, wow, I maybe haven't been as involved as I could be, that might be something that you could like step in and be a little bit more involved and just play with it a little bit. You know, give it a little bit of trial and error. Because there's no panacea for teenage defiance, it's important for parents and educators to cultivate skills that will help them react to a wide variety of causes. The skill we'd like to focus on is active listening, a technique that gets applied in discipline ranging from education to counseling to the law. Active listening, simply put, means listening with the intent to understand. That might seem intuitive, but it's not actually an easy thing to do. As this lesson from Bridgeway Learning Center makes clear, we don't typically listen to understand so much as we listen to respond. And that's not a trivial distinction when teenagers are involved, because whatever is going on, teenagers want to be heard and understood. If you're just listening to respond, that is to argue, you're just going to deepen the divisions between yourself and your teenager. And that's true regardless of where the defiance is coming from. So how do you listen actively? The Bridgeway article does a great job summarizing it, which I'll link in the description below. So you should go ahead and read it if you're looking for more context. And we've also talked about something similar on this channel before, which is comparing spanking to positive parenting. Basically though, active listening is about listening for main points and comprehending the totality of what your teenager is trying to tell you. If you can do that and respond to it, then you'll be much better off trying to fix whatever your teenager is trying to tell you about, and one step closer to clearing up chronic defiance. And on a more abstract level, active listening is just a stopgap. Teenagers are going to be better at communicating and better at dealing with the emotional turmoil in general if they have some personal resources of their own. And a good way to develop those resources is to study philosophy with your kids. I've talked about it a lot on this channel, and it may just seem kind of like boilerplate at this point, but I do really think that it's a huge advantage that that parents that use this with their kids, this philosophy for children strategy, they have a huge advantage over other parents who don't use this strategy. So I've suggested before on this channel on forming good friendships and using this strategy to form those good friendships. And in that video, we talked about try to clear away the haze of social anxiety from your child's mind and talk to them in a clear and in reasonable terms. Not an easy thing to do with a teenager, I'll give you that, certainly. But it's easier if you've taught them to look at things in the clear, well-reasoned way that philosophy calls for. And this is a good point that I want to harp on as well. If you guys are using the tried and true philosophy for children method from an early standpoint, it doesn't have to be like the exact method, but if you're using those principles, reasoning with your child objectively, admitting where you can be wrong, especially when they call out your bogus argument. Because I think we've all had that time, like as kids, where we saw where our parents were making bogus arguments. And then we're trying to just be objective. And in our passion, we're like, hey, dad, or hey, mom, like that's BS. Like, you know it is. And then the parents just kind of double down. Why I'm your parent? And then there's yelling. And if you're using that method instead of using that and you go the philosophy for kids route, and you were just like, in that moment, like, you know what? That's actually great. You're right. My argument isn't good. Like, I need to come up with something better. If you're using that early on throughout childhood, you're not going to have as many of these defiant teenager moments. You just won't, because your parenting style has been that of consistency all the way through to that point. So you're really just not going to have to deal with those. So you're causing yourself more trouble later on in life if you're not kind of using the well-reasoned, objective arguments and using philosophy for children method with your kids early on, if you would have been early on using that method. But if you're not using it, then yeah, you're going to have a whole bunch of these problems. Mm-hmm. Teaching your kids how to work through emotional and personal problems intellectually will pay off immensely when they're teenagers, especially if you get it started early in their education. Even if you don't though, and even if you don't start work on philosophy until your kids are already teenagers and are already running into issues with defiance, teaching philosophy is still a good idea because it will help temper their opposition and give them an intellectual anchor. And above all, remember that as confusing as teenagerdom is for you, it's probably more confusing for your teenager. And empathy is as important in active listening as it is in philosophy. So hopefully this can give my fellow parents out there, well, I probably shouldn't say fellow because I'm not a parent, but hopefully it can give all my homie parents out there some good tips and tricks to kind of like just help with these problems. If you do have some teenagers who are defiant and argumentative, be a good chance to step back, see what you can do, how you can address that, and maybe just come to some sort of compromise with them. And hopefully this video will help with that. And as always, I'd love to hear your concerns, your critiques especially, because I am objective. I like to hear where I'm wrong. And if you have a great argument, put it down there in the comment section below, because I want to hear where I'm wrong. And if you have some things to add, I'd love to hear it as well. And parents, Do you find the philosophy for children technique to be especially helpful? Have you found it to be immensely rewarding? Or have you found it to be maybe mediocre at best, or maybe not having any clear distinction in progress at all? I'd love to hear it. And for teachers, do you find the philosophy for children method applicable in the classroom? Have you tried it in the classroom? Would you like to try it in the classroom? Or maybe if you've tried it, have you found it to be not all that helpful? What insights and what special moments have you seen from those kids using it in the classroom? I'm sure there's been some amazing moments in the classroom where kids are just discussing and the teacher is just guiding it along, and all these kids are having an amazing time, like just having that personal responsibility of having a conversation and being able to reason and argue back and forth, and all kind of cohesively coming together at the end. And I'd love to hear about that. So without further ado, stay classy, my fellow educators, and I'll see y'all in the next video. Later.